And Brandon, I need to elevate some of our folks to panelist, but I'm not seeing the option.
If you just let me know who, and I can elevate them.
Sure. So we need to elevate Deanna Sargent.
Okay.
We need to elevate Representative Kendra Johnson and Wes.
Okay, I've elevated everyone.
Kevin Smith as well. Let's see. If you see a Marva Hammond join, she also should be a panelist. And good morning, everybody. We are just trying to let our virtual folks join and establish a quorum before we get going. I don't think Karen can make this one. I could be wrong about that. Yeah, she might can.
And Caitlin, I made you a co-host, so you should be able to.
Okay. Great. Thank you. All right. See here. We'll give it one more minute and then we can get started. Okay, so I'm not seeing any other members at this point. But again, if you see a Marva Hammond, she is also a panelist. Okay. Yes. I didn't see she declined. Oh, she did. Oh. Yeah. All right. Okay. So I'm going to turn it over to our chair, Amy Walls, to give the welcome and introductions for the Finance and Development Subcommittee meeting. Right. And well, real quick, let me get our slide going. Okay, are folks online seeing this screen share? Not yet? All right, 1 minute. All right, are we seeing the PowerPoint now?
Yep.
Great, thank you.
Sorry, yeah.
Okay. So we do have a number of people on too, but just want to call the meeting to order. Thank everyone for being here. Thank you, Representative Johnson, who it's not on the screen, but it is here. We want to thank you for chairing the larger task force and for really leading the charge on this. So this is our first meeting of the Finance and Development Subcommittee. We're going to start with just a brief welcome and do member introductions. So we have 9 members of our task force. I'll start with myself and then I'll move to those individuals who are on the webinar. So I'm Amy Walls. I'll be chairing this committee. I work for Discover in a community reinvestment capacity. I am also a member of Delaware's Council on Housing and have been a board member of a number of nonprofits focused on affordable housing throughout the state. I live in Sussex County as well. So we'll move on next to those on the webinar. So Deanna, I have you first, if you don't mind.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Deanna Sargent. I am Vice President of Community Connection with Senior Corporation, overseeing our community development work in Wilmington, Delaware. Senior is a community development financial institution providing funding to developers to create affordable housing and community facilities that bring resources and services to low and moderate income communities across our footprint in the Mid-Atlantic and Midwest. And I also serve on boards that create affordable housing. And thank you for having me.
Great, thank you, Deanna. Kevin, would you mind unmuting and going next?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. Kevin Smith. I'm the CEO with Habitat for Humanity of Newcastle County. I serve on a board with Deanna. A lot of us cross-pollinate in many ways, and happy to be part of this committee.
Great, thank you, Kevin. Wes, would you mind unmuting and going next?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Wesley Stefanik. I am the CEO of the Delaware Association of Realtors. We have 4,200 realtors, real estate agents within the state of Delaware, and many are very interested to be a part of this process. But I'm here on their behalf, and I'm looking forward to it.
Great, thank you, Wes. Okay, so in the room, Karen, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, I'm Karen Speakman, Executive Director of Neighborhood Partners. We help other nonprofits develop housing. We develop housing ourselves, and we are also a CDFI.
Great, thanks, Karen. Matt?
Sure, Matt Parks and I work on investments for Discover. I participate in a variety of financing, both debt and equity, for multi-family apartments throughout Delaware and the Mid-Atlantic region, as well as facilitate significant investments in DSHA's mortgage programs.
Great, thank you. And the other three members of our council are Fred Venezuela. How am I saying it? Venezuela? Thank you. From the Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh. Preston Shell, who is a developer, single family, largely home developer in Sussex County. And Marva Hammond. Marva and I believe her father developed a multi-family affordable housing development in Newcastle County and Wilmington, really on their own, bootstrapping. So I think everyone brings just a great wealth of experience and different perspectives to the conversation. So thanks everyone for being here. We thought we'd start by just reviewing the task force and subcommittee charge. So we have some slides for that.
Yes. Oh, goodness.
And so while we're doing that, just an overlay of how the meeting is structured today. So you'll see the agenda that's here. We're going to review the charge. We're going to review the housing production needs. And then we're going to do a brainstorming exercise that's really among the committee members. Then we're going to go to public comment, and what I would ask for everyone in the room to really think about, are there any nuances or things that we're missing as we do our brainstorming exercise? Feel free to bring your perspective and the comments that you had prepared, in advance, but also if there's anything that, we're missing in our conversation, you have other experience. And so we really welcome that and want to include that as we're thinking about it. Hey. Preston's here.
Sorry.
That's okay. You are just got past welcome and introduction. So perfect. So would you mind just introducing yourself to the degree?
Sure. Preston Shell with Oceanic and Shell Brothers, a developer and builder predominantly in Southern Delaware.
Okay, so our task force charge, this is the larger task force, and it's to make finding and recommendations on how the state, local governments, and others can promote the production of rental units and homes that are affordable to all income levels throughout Delaware. There's three larger things here, and I think two that we really play into in this committee. So one is consider and review the best practices related to land use, affordable housing production. And that third one, affordable housing finance, as it's been adopted in other states. Review zoning and permitting laws and regulations that govern residential land use and evaluate how well they enable or inhibit production of housing. And then study and review land use development and residential housing construction practices to determine what factors are limiting production. And we think about what factors, obviously financing plays a role in that as well. So we definitely think that that's the first one, and there's that third one really complement the work that we hope to do. Okay, so this is our approach. So we're going to try to identify challenges and barriers. So today's meeting is really going to be focused on the challenges and barriers, identifying potential solutions, prioritizing actionable recommendations. And then for each recommendation, we're going to indicate, whose role is this to implement? And then what does it take to actually implement those changes? Okay, so this is our timeline, and the reason we thought this was really important to show today is that it's going to be really accelerated. So there's going to be some significance for us to really capture as much as we can in the 90 minutes we have together. We're only going to have 3, maybe 4 subcommittee meetings, so it's a lot to do in just that limited period of time. And so we're going to ask for a little homework in between just to try to get some additional information so that we can be a little bit further along because it is so accelerated. Yeah.
You want me to go to the next slide? Sure.
Yeah. So this is in the regulation that established the task force. These are the things that were specifically delegated to this committee. So really thinking about dedicated funding sources for affordable housing. And you'll see there are some suggestions that were provided there. Those suggestions were provided by the larger task force in our last task force committee meeting. So we figured that's just a nice kind of starting point for us as we start thinking about opportunities. Another thing that we'll be looking at are developer incentives, like what types of things are necessary to really entice developers to participate in this space and do it successfully. Legal financial tools to promote home ownership, surplus land and land donations. And we can get everybody these slides too to make sure you've got a chance to get that. Great. So other required paths that they've asked us to review through the legislation is infill development, cost sharing, grant or philanthropic opportunities, and then some other things that were brought up that we think are finance related in the larger task force were the capacity building of our developers, specifically related to federal funding, the significant increase in operating costs that developers are experiencing as they're trying to operate properties, whether they be, affordable multifamily rental or permanent supportive housing or other housing types that require ongoing maintenance and support. And then financing for things like weatherization and climate resiliency as well.
Thank you. I think we're gonna have to speak up a little bit now that the air is kicked on.
Okay.
For the folks online.
If you need me to move questions. Okay, so parking lot. So we really, because we only have 3, maybe 4 meetings, it's going to be really important that we try to stay on task. So one of the tasks is really focused on production. Also considering those focus areas, infill development, financing, incentives, that sort of thing. But we do want to put things that are outside of that in the parking lot. So if things arise that, kind of fall outside of that scope, we do want to capture them because we think that they either, one, be referred to other subcommittees. So if it's a planning and zoning issue, there is a committee that's focused on that. So make sure that they get that information. Or if we find something throughout all of this process that just continues to arise, that's not really addressed by production, we think that it is, beneficial that we can raise that up to the task force to say, can we acknowledge these items in the final report as something they could consider in a further study or a further task force or some other opportunity. So just trying to be laser focused as much as possible while being respectful of all of the other things that just kind of arise in the conversation. Okay, so here are other subcommittees. So there's regulatory and permitting, This one, finance and development, construction, manufactured housing, and community focus groups.
When you use the word development in that context, you mean like land development and construction? Or okay.
Sorry, yes. So they could hear me on the thing. Yes, yes. Okay, so we thought we'd start with, and Caitlin, I don't know, do you want to run through this? The projected housing needs. We'd start with kind of like, what do we know that we need from a production perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So for folks online, I am Caitlin Del Calo, Chief Strategy Advisor at Delaware State Housing Authority. I oversaw the development of our 2023 statewide housing needs assessment, which projects how many units we need by 2030 to keep up with population growth. Those projections are broken down by county, by tenure. So whether those should be units for renters or units for homeowners. And then it also breaks down by affordability as measured by a percentage of AMI. So we know how many units we need that have to be affordable to people at 0 to 30% AMI, 31 to 50, et cetera. These projections assume that our current statewide homeownership rate will remain steady. That's 71% currently. But I will note that there is a very sizable homeownership gap by race. There's a 30-point difference here in Delaware between the Black homeownership rate and the white homeownership rate. So if it is a policy goal of this subcommittee, this task force, or stakeholders writ large to close that gap, then that could, result in a higher statewide homeownership and a need for more homeowner units versus rental units. And then these projections are in addition to our existing shortage of approximately 19,400 rental units that are priced to be affordable for our lowest income households that are making between 0 and 50% of area median income. In order to address that shortage, we don't necessarily need to produce 19,400 new units. We could address it through new construction. We could also address it by subsidizing current housing, either tenant-based or project-based subsidies. So just to throw that out there, that there's a number of different ways to address that existing shortage, and it's not just new construction. Okay, so this slide shows the total number of housing units needed in Delaware by 2030 to accommodate growth. Again, this is not even factoring in the existing shortage of affordable rentals for people at 0 to 50% AMI. But you can see, again, it's broken down by owner versus renter and by AMI level.
But the total is still 2,400.
Yes, yeah. So the total is still 24,349.
So that number you showed earlier, that was 19,400.
Would be in addition to 24,000.
Well, because it was just 0 to 50%.
Correct.
But when I add those two 0 to 50%, it looks like it's more like 5,500. What was that a different year?
I'm sorry.
So go back a slide or two.
Sure.
So you said the projections are in addition to the existing shortage.
Yes.
So you're saying just to maintain the status quo, like
We're
to
still-
stick to that shortage, we need to produce 5,500 new units between 0 and 50% AMI, price to be affordable to those households.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Okay, so that's what it is for the state of Delaware. And then here is what it is for Newcastle County. So in Newcastle County by 2030, we need just over 4,000 more units. The majority of those should be owner units versus renter units. And again, this is in addition to a shortage of 12,000 rental units affordable to households making 0 to 50% AMI in Newcastle County. And these slides will be posted online. They will be shared with committee members, so you will all be able to access this information following the meeting.
Does this assume that we don't lose any existing affordable units?
This is just looking at growth, like how many more people are moving to the state of Delaware.
I understand you have certain units right now that are quote unquote affordable, that it may not be affordable in 2030.
So you can just add more units to it.
Yeah, so I don't think it factors in, upcoming affordability restriction periods that are going to expire.
Do we know what that is?
I do not have that information on hand now. Okay, so here's what it is for Kent County. So in Kent County, we need almost 7,000 more units to keep up with growth. And then when you look at the existing shortage, 3,354 rental units needed to be affordable to people making between 0 and 50% AMI today. And then last but not least, this is the tally for Sussex County. So obviously we're gonna have a lot of growth in Sussex County by 2030. We need over 13,000 more homeownership units. And I wanna note that this is, again, just for growth, and it's not taking into account the need for seasonal demand.
And is it just for home ownership, like you just said?
It is, yeah. So the owner versus renter breakdown is there, but these are units for like your primary residence.
Do you know how much we've produced in the last 5 years, 3 years? Like, it'd be interesting to know if you're like, yeah, this is how much we need between now and 2030, 13,392, and between now and 6 years ago, we produced 11,493. Or did we produce 680?
Right.
Like, how close are we to actually hitting this historically?
Yeah, I don't have
Because I'll add to that, a lot of this growth is basically having to come to us because people are choosing to come from other states to come live here in Sussex County. So I'm assuming this growth is because the growth rate is happening the way it's happening. But that's also because of I don't know if it's the policies we have, but because it's very favorable to come retire at the beach, we need to have all these units. Now, once you have all those units, then you need people to serve all those people. So that becomes another equation. So how much of that 13,000 is just predicated upon people wanting to move here versus people needing to have housing because they are here, right?
And note that it's only up to 100% AMI.
So 100,000 plus, that's where the most of the units.
Was it M plus? Is it really beyond that? Okay.
So we could attract 6,300 retirees from some other state to come live here. I'm making an assumption that's what that 100% AMI quote unquote mean. I also understand that these MIs, when you start talking about retirees, is that they don't have income, they got a lot of assets, but they don't have the income, so they would be considered 51 of 80%, but they have a lot of money in the bank.
Yeah. Do you want me to move on?
Yeah.
Okay.
They are artificially, like on that point though, you've seen the AMI increase in Sussex County. It's getting artificially inflated by the retirees, by their interest income and the stuff they report. So everybody's like, oh, everybody in Sussex County is getting paid more and doing better. And we're able to charge more for our discounted units because our discounted units are tied to an AMI. But that AMI is not going up because more servers and bartenders are getting paid more. It's going up because a retiree just paid $1.2 million.
Stock market's up, or the interest rates are higher.
Yeah, interest income at $373,000 last year, but yeah.
Because interest rates are higher last year, higher AMI.
Yeah.
And the market's up.
Yeah, so my point is, it's like a double-edged sword. It's too bad that the HUD can't somehow do an analysis of here's what's happening to the AMI for the workforce and relative to here's what's happening for the AMI for everybody that declares that county as their primary tax, place.
All right, so that was the end of the slides from the H&A, but of course that is available on our website. We have an executive summary, the full report, 386 pages long. And again, if you're interested in knowing how many like seasonal vacation units we need, that information is also in there and would be over and above the figures that were shared on the slides.
All right, so we thought we'd spend a lot of time today just really brainstorming those challenges and barriers. So today's meeting, as I mentioned, is focused on what are the barriers that are preventing us from producing enough affordable housing to meet the needs, or even a lot more affordable housing, even if the larger number is feels overwhelming. And so I broke it down really here by policy, administration, and by administration I mean are there administrative barriers from a state level or a local level that are more kind of department specific versus legislative specific. Tools, and for that I put financial, but you know, there could be other tools that could be available, and then market factor. So, you know, the idea that there are some things that we just can't control, but maybe there's some data points that we need or that we'd like to get so that we can really understand the problem to develop perhaps the financial tools that are necessary. So we're seeking to really just kind of create a list of those barriers. If you have any thoughts on potential solutions, we'll take them today as well. Attempt when we're looking at those barriers to identify really who. Is it a state level issue? Is it a local government issue? Does the private sector play a role in this? And then some things to consider are, you know, dedicated funding sources for affordable housing or developer incentives. And I would say it's really easy to say we just need resources, but I just encourage you as we're going through brainstorming to dig a little bit deeper on resources for what might they look like, that sort of thing, so that we can go just a little bit deeper into this if we can. Some other things, deed restrictions, you know, kind of community land trust idea, you know, workforce housing. How do we access, how do people, developers, whomever access land, whether that be surplus from the state or other government sources. Donations, how do we incentivize donations? For example, we have the Neighborhood Assistance Act, but it only has so much capacity every year. Infill development, I was at the COC meeting last week, and somebody mentioned that, you know, we should just be buying houses, you know, in Wilmington, for example, that are vacant and just redeveloping them, because that would be so much cheaper than, you know, building new homes. And I know Kevin Smith, you know, a member of our committee, would tell you that that's not exactly the case. But that's a feeling, but there is some challenge with that as it relates to local code and other things that could play a role there. Even the idea of like timable titles play a role in infill development, and whether you can access those properties and actually get clear title on them. So, so with that, I'm gonna be quiet for a few minutes and just encourage the committee. If they have any kind of initial thoughts. I don't know if you want to kind of write down policy administration or whatever if you want. I thought maybe we could back up to the slide that showed some of the some of the thoughts from the larger task force, and that might help us kind of get started.
Yeah, so real quick, I'll give a note, and then a couple of our members have joined online and their hands are raised. So before I get to Marva and Fred, I just want to reiterate that the information in bold are the topics that the legislation requires this subcommittee to contemplate. And then the sub-bullets are the ideas that were shared at the full task force meeting that happened a couple weeks ago. So Marva had her hand raised first.
Hi, everybody. I am happy to be a part of this team. I think when I join anything or participate in anything that has anything to do with affordable housing, I like to first ask what everybody's perspective of affordable housing is, because that term gets thrown out an awful lot right now. And sometimes there's no determination of what actual affordable housing is. So I'm curious as to, when we talk about affordable housing on this, what are we looking at? You know, what does that mean?
Yeah, so my definition is 80% of area median income and below. I don't know if anyone.
I'd probably extend it to 120% below homeownership, but
For homeownership.
yeah, but obviously the needs are greater at the very lower incomes for housing.
Yeah, when I talk about it, I talk about affordable housing as both low income housing, which is 0 to 60%, and workforce housing, which sometimes it's 0 to 120, sometimes it's 80 to 120, sometimes it's 60 to 100, but it's anywhere from 60 to 120% of AMI. So you're talking about both low income housing and workforce housing, which I consider both to be affordable housing.
I take affordable housing to be the payment for the housing to be at 30% of the gross income.
Yeah, so you basically say when somebody become burdened by their cost of housing.
Yeah, I think I want to ask that because even though like my affordable housing project, I do 30% of their gross income, I also pay all of their utilities. And so, for example, I have one person here that has a car. She had an issue with her car, and with her like with even just paying 30% of her gross income, it's either get her car fixed and go to work or pay her rent. So I think for me, when I look at housing affordability and we're just looking at AMI, does that really capture like real life? Like, how much money do they have saved? If they had like a major issue with a car or a family member or a pet or something like that, does that put them in a place where they can't pay that 1 month of what we call affordable rent? So like I always like to keep that at top of mind for everybody when we talk about these things. So
Thank you. Fred?
Yeah, thanks. So, two areas of opportunity here, I think, for us is in the southern part of Delaware, I think you have actual land, but the land really isn't usable for development because of infrastructure or lack of infrastructure. So I think that's one thing, where can you expand to? Where are your areas of opportunity? And I think there's one of the impediments is the lack of infrastructure that you would have there to be able to build out. The second thing that I would say is, there is no one funding source that covers a whole development or project. Everything is required to be part of a funding stack, and the funding or funders don't always necessarily jive or work together. And I think there's an area for opportunity to make it easier to do this type of development. The more we could get the funding stacks to communicate with one another or to cooperate with one another, the easier it's going to be for development and for developers to engage in this type of activity.
So, Fred, if we delve a little bit deeper into that as it relates to specifically the funding stack, are there any particular like funding sources or that we can speak to directly?
So, I mean, look, you have everything from your tax credits to home dollars that are all very heavily regulated and compliance driven. And sometimes the compliance from some of those funding stacks don't interplay very well or very neatly. And I'll even throw the Federal Home Loan Bank into that mix as well. So the more we could get them to play together well on a particular project, the easier it's going to be. Right now, for the tax credit, you require audits, we require 20 different things, and a lot of times they're similar but not the same, and it is a burden. It is a burden on the developer to choose for each funding source.
Deanna also has her hand raised, and would it be helpful for me to start writing on a flip chart or?
Can you do both though? Do you want me to write on the flip chart?
You have
Okay.
that recorded too, right?
Yes, it is recorded. We have flip charts there, and there are markers. Sorry, on that side.
There, they can see me, but then I'm afraid I'm gonna topple a chair.
You want me to do that? You can take part in the meeting.
I'll put you to work.
Nothing else to do.
I'll be right fast.
What color would you like?
Okay.
Don't have to pay for breast cancer, so take break.
Okay.
This far we have land but no infrastructure. And then the funding streams not talking to each other.
And at this point, Deanna, you are up.
Thank you. Put my hand down. I think my recommendation may point to Fred's point, but first I'd like to say that I am at a CDFI conference and going to a couple of sessions tomorrow around shared equity models. So hopefully I can bring some of that information back to this committee for our next meeting or in between. But I wanted to mention the Catalyst Fund, which is a partnership between SENER and DSHA leveraging ARPA dollars, where we created this one-stop shop fund for developers who are developing home ownership opportunities, but perhaps we can think about how that could be utilized for rental units as well. But it's basically a source of funding where developers can get construction financing and the gap subsidy that's often needed to create home ownership housing because the cost to rehab or construct the home exceeds the cost that it will sell for in the market. So to Fred's point, that capital stack that leverages a lot of different sources, while helpful to the developer, it can be present a hardship on the compliance, from the compliance standpoint, so on and so forth. So thinking about, how can we leverage some of the lessons learned from the Catalyst Fund that's, currently in implementation and leverage that to deploy another fund that provides that one-stop shop for developers to create housing for home ownership and perhaps rental in the future could be a way to address that. And one of the things that I was going to mention in terms of impediments to housing production is that need for gap subsidy, which is why developers often have to cobble together home, CDBG, AHP, and other sources of grant funding that makes the capital stack very complex. But that's always going to be a great need, especially when we're talking about affordable housing production, to keep that cost lower so that that cost isn't ultimately passed on to the home buyer. So we have to talk more about, that gap subsidy that's needed and looking to, can the state be in a position to provide more of that funding? And then also, how can that funding be provided in an efficient way? And so, looking at something similar to the Catalyst Fund could be a solution for that. And I also wanted to say, and, as a complement, thinking about sources of funding that also could be used for down payment settlement assistance is the other side that could be useful in helping the consumer get into that housing. So that's all I have for now.
Deanna, can I ask you how much, is there funding still available in the Catalyst Fund?
Yes and no. So yes, because it's been, most of it has been committed, but no from the sense of developers being able to access future funding because it's tied to ARPA and the ARPA dollars have to be committed by the end of this year. We will have no additional rounds for developers to apply. So only the developers who apply through our first and second rounds are being worked through the process for committed funds from the Catalyst Fund.
I'll say too, I think about the Catalyst Fund and sorry, I'm talking so loud, but I'm trying to make sure they hear me. But when I think about the Catalyst Fund, that's a tool we have today that we're likely not going to have tomorrow unless we fund it. And then there's also limited geography that can be used. So I've often heard from developers in Kent and Sussex that it's not as accessible for them. So just, two potential barriers, one positive thing, we have a tool, negative, there's, no more funding and no potential funding stream. And then, geographic limitation.
Yeah, and that, that's a good point. And as I stated, we can look at the lessons learned. And so right now the Catalyst Fund is limited to qualified census tracts, downtown development district and strong neighborhood geographic areas. But if this is, a workable tool that could be used in the future, perhaps we just consider changing the parameters around the fund so that it could be utilized by more developers throughout the state.
Thanks, Dan.
So I know that you said you don't want to talk about, how did you put it? That we need more financing, but that really is the key. We need more money, honestly. And we can talk about all these different programs, but if there's not affordable financing, things are not going to get done, and or subsidy, right? If there are grants or financing. As nonprofits and other for-profit developers, we learn all these different programs. It's incredibly, and I get concerned about somewhat the capacity building, but yet maybe if DSHA or someone was the holder of this knowledge and we could tap into it, or if we could make a one-stop situation. But we're talking I don't know that this committee can address federal programs and changing those and making it work together. We have to learn how they work together and do them. But honestly, I feel this task force is really, we need to find ways to make financing low cost or no cost. Because I mean, basically, when you do rental housing, even at 1% interest rates and with tax credits, you need subsidy for the rents for the people to be able to afford them. So, you know, the market is not doing it. That's sort of my frustration and my spiel.
I agree. I mean, you have, when we talked about this is a scalable problem. This is a problem that has to be attacked with scale. We want to make a difference. It's got to be done at scale. So I somewhat say you have to know all the federal sources that are coming. We got to tap into every federal source we have.
I think we do a good job of that.
Right. But then all these other overlays, people need to know what the cost is going to be. If you take, I mean, these gentlemen can probably tell us what's going to cost to build a reasonable cost 3-bedroom house. He probably knows what it's going to cost to build a reasonable 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom unit. That's the cost. And then you multiply that by these numbers here that you're going to need at scale.
Right.
Right. And then you layer on all the sources that we have. And what's the gap? And if you want to solve it, it's a math problem. It's a math problem. Now, how do you get those resources in? That's a different story. How you include home ownership is a different thing. But you can know the cost. The cost is that these guys can tell you exactly what the number we need to have in, and we know exactly what we get in federal resources. After that, that delta, state's got to put it in. That's the bottom line. And then you got to say, okay, maybe you can tweak something here or there to reduce the cost through scalability. Right. And we've also got a lot of players in the housing side in Delaware, you know. With all due respect, if you add all that overhead into this equation to go along with the scalability of cost, a lot of our subsidy is going to get eaten up in overhead. That's the bottom line. So for every dollar of overhead, that's another portion of affordability that can be done.
Yeah, I would add though that the more subsidy that comes in, the more overhead you need to make sure that you can do the compliance. So we have to be mindful. I don't know that adding dollars necessarily reduces overhead, but it's maybe a different sort of thing. But you're actually getting into our
scalability. But if you have 5 organizations doing overhead, you have 5 organizations doing overhead versus 1 organization doing overhead, it's cheap.
We have a couple comments on the.
Yes, Kevin Smith's hand is raised.
Hey, Kevin.
Hey, so agree with Karen and everything that everybody's sharing. And I know this isn't exactly the finance development realm, but you got to have the ability to have density to stretch out the cost. I'll just, a couple things to share more specifically. And we have to get the for-profit builders involved in this from a scalability standpoint. The nonprofits can't produce enough to meet the demand, and they're all going to say they need density. And so you need, I know that's in the regulatory piece, but you need for-right zoning. Because when we go to develop a property, like right now, Habitat's going to be developing a property in Glasgow for 15 new townhomes. The great thing is the Presbyterian Church is donating the land, but I have to rezone historical, So I have to pay a bunch of other fees, but if the zoning was right, I wouldn't have to go through as many hoops and pay as much money. And in Newcastle County, the Unified Development Code, which was put in 2000, only about 70 units of affordable housing have been built since 2000 in the unincorporated area in Newcastle County. So, and I think the other piece of this is you provide incentives for developers for density. The county also put in a moderately priced dwelling unit ordinance. And we had a builder reach out to us because they could get their affordable units built either on-site or off-site. So they negotiated with us and helped fund some of our projects off-site. So that became a new source of funding for us and helped them with their density and meet the moderately priced dwelling unit ordinance. I think the other thing is we're looking at federal, state, the municipalities can start creating housing trust funds based on the other development that's going on. and that could be used by affordable housing developers or to augment the costs that are needed in the low-income tax credit projects, potentially. I served on the Newcastle County Affordable Housing Task Force for a couple of years, and that was one of our recommendations, that the county put some of this money aside for low-income tax credit deals that need more cash in the deal to help develop more apartments out in Newcastle County.
Great.
So how much money is in that Newcastle County fund?
I think it was, well, this is a couple of years ago when I was on that board, and that was about $2 million. I don't know where it stands now, but every development that happens in Newcastle County now, there is a fee structure that the builder has to put into.
So
Gary Casey would be the one to ask about where it's at now.
So if you're, Kevin, if you're building as an affordable builder, whether it's market rate affordability or a nonprofit, do you still have to pay into the fund as well?
No. But I will, out in the county, will have to pay most likely the impact fees because the county right now does not have an exemption for affordable housing development on the on those impact fees, and they can be as high as $15,000, $20,000 to $30,000 a unit.
Yeah.
I'll probably have to go to county council to get, again, there's all this kind of red tape and regulation on the front end, including the federal money. You know, for those of us who got congressionally directed spending, great news. I got 1.5 million one year, 4.6 the next. The environmental 360 review takes like up to a year. So it's not, these things aren't easy to navigate. You know, so somehow the money also has to be not only more of it, but kind of less onerous to utilize.
I agree with the comments that in order to really affect this issue kind of at scale, like, and I'm not, when I say this, I'm not trying to belittle the guys building 8 units in Seaford and 13 units in Laurel. Like, we need that too, but that's not going to do much. We need somebody to build 300 units in Rehoboth. And so we got to get the for-profit guys. Either ARPA needs to happen again, which in my lifetime, I bet it never does. And quite frankly, our country can't afford if it did anyway, so it probably shouldn't. But when that money all dries up, like, we're all swimming, including for-profit guys like me. We took advantage of 2 ARPA-related funding sources for just under 10 million to provide discounted units in 2 of our apartment projects. And that was like sometimes the entire budget of DSHA were just 2 projects that we did. So when that money dries up, it's going to be really difficult. But in Sussex County, and I speak, by the way, from a very Sussex County and for-profit bias. So take that, understand when I'm speaking, that's when I'm speaking from that perspective.
But I don't think that differs in Newcastle County either.
No, but as far as like, we do have land in Sussex County, some of it does have infrastructure, but none of it's zoned correctly. And if you really want to be the bad guy in Sussex County, take a property in level 1, which by definition means it's surrounded by neighbors. Right. And propose an affordable housing project. You think I'm a pariah now? Just wait until that happens. So the county has the SCRP program. It wasn't, I'm trying to say this tactfully, it wasn't developed by someone that understands financing, interest rates, construction costs, debt coverage ratios. It was, at the end of the day, someone said, but my teacher friend only wants to pay $750. And so they set the rents at 25% of 50% AMI. And all of a sudden, even the consultant that the county hired that understands financing was saying, you can't do that. No one will be able to afford it, and no developers will do it. They just say, yeah, but my teachers don't want to spend that much. So nobody's using that program, with the exception of nonprofit guys that are using financing coming from tax credits and stuff like that. But that wasn't the intention. But the SCRP program needs to be fixed. It needs to be exclusively by right. And I'm getting together with Seth Collette of LNWA And we're gonna propose some new ordinances to the county to hopefully fix that. But that's another thing to mention, by the way, we built 1,500 apartments in the last 8 years or so in Sussex County. And as far as addressing affordability, workforce, not low income. Our rents are set, our market rents are between 75 and like 97 to 98% affordable to households making between 75 and 98% of AMI. So that's the best way at scale. But we've had to rezone every one of those properties, and it's getting harder and harder. And the other thing that's happening is our county keeps making changes to reduce density on your average project. There's a lot of, every time I sell a home to a retiree from wherever, they don't show up to my next public hearing and say, yes, approve this next project. Yeah. Like they join anti-development groups and they're stronger now, and there's more of them because we've sold more houses to them. And pretty soon the dynamics of the Sussex County Council is going to turn over and it's going to become entirely anti-growth. And then it's either going to dramatically cause sprawl because they'll reduce the densities on everything. So to provide the same number of housing units, we'll have to eat away more acreage. And they've got to make some changes. They got to be a little bit more proactive in making zoning changes to allow for affordable housing. I've been telling them something I'll tell you guys right now for the last 15 years. I've said never give away density without getting something for it. So if I walk in with Jim Fuquay, who's our latest attorney down there, who's very good, and make an argument as to why my AR1 property should be for 2 units per acre, should be rezoned to 4 units per acre, say yes, but only if the county gets something, or so basically saying, okay, well, I'll tell you what, Mr. Developer, you can do 4 units per acre. If you're in level 1 or 2, you have public sewer and water, you're within X number of, miles of public transportation or whatever parameters you want to put on it. But those extra 2 units per acre, we get 20% of them have to be priced to be affordable. So you got to do it. You have to look at the pro formas of the developers and make sure that that developer is still better off financially developing at 4 units per acre and providing those affordable units. That's where the SCRP went wrong. Something happened at the last second there where they completely ignored. I was feeding them all my pro formas. So they had them. I don't know if they knew how to work them or use them, but they had them all. And the consultant was feeding them a ton of good information too. They paid a third party, and then they completely changed it at the last second, and it's useless. But to get to kind of some specifics, some things that I think we can do in Sussex County along Route 1, DART owns 2 amazing properties where they don't use the air rights. All they use is the surface level. And talk about a perfect location to do seasonal workforce housing, then right above the bus system that will take you to your jobs. I proposed that to them, but like most things bureaucratically, it kind of goes on deaf ears. You get like an email like 2.5 months later. Thank you for your email, Mr. Shell. We are considering your proposal, and we'll get like, and then you never hear anything.
The other thing I'll add there is that when you do your pro forma, what I don't think a lot of folks understand is that you got to make a profit because you're for profit. No, you got to pay your shareholders, you pay your owners. And on top of that, in order to pay your profit, you have to pay federal government, state, and federal taxes on top of it. So when you think of, okay, a reasonable rate of return, 10%, 20% rate of return on your property.
Depends on the risk. The riskier the development, the higher the targeted IRR.
You're gonna make a higher IRR. But then you're laying, okay, well, in order to get that, I gotta pay Uncle Sam 21%, and I gotta pay the state of Delaware, what is it, 4 or 5%. Right? So right there on the cost of this, automatically just paying taxes on the revenue of building this housing, it's 45% markup.
Right.
Right off the bat.
But so some other identifiable things that we could utilize to lower the cost of affordable housing, which is really easy, particularly in Sussex County, which is swimming in cash. They like don't want you to know how much money they have stocked away in like their reserve, but it's over 100 million. They should waive as long as you have a unit that is going to be priced. I don't know if 80% is the right number. I don't know if 100% is probably 80% is the right number. Price to be affordable to households making 80% of very median income or less. If it's rental, it has to be dedicated for 20 years or more. If it's for sale, there has to be also some stipulation you can't sell it to someone who then just resells it and marks it up. Right. So I don't know if it's in a community land trust or what kind of structure, but they should waive the impact fees and the building permit fees and the inspection fees. That'll total $15,000 to $20,000 a unit, and trust me, Sussex County can afford it.
And you should have to pay state tax profit.
Yeah, that's going a little further. There should be some kind of You certainly shouldn't have to pay transfer tax.
At the end of the day, you're taking out of one pocket tax revenue to give it as incentive to afford health. The money's a match. It doesn't matter.
Right.
Right? That right there, whatever that amount of money is, it's just what right pocket, left pocket.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
But the biggest issue is until it's a better financial decision for me to build workforce or affordable housing than for me to build more expensive housing for rich retirees, you're never going to have the development community doing it at scale. So whether, and also you can't shame or strong arm a developer to do it. Like a lot of people think, like even, and I get along with them great, but even our county administrator will sometimes call me like, come on, man, like, why don't you just do this? Like somehow it's like, I'm being a bad guy because I'm not building more affordable housing. That's not going to work. You have to, the incentive has to be there in order to do. The other thing is you have to be able to finance these things. And sometimes, like I told him, I said, look, I ran the numbers of your SERP program through. It's a 7.7% IRR. He's like, so you're still making money. So what's the problem? I said, what bank in their right mind is going to lend me money to build a $50 million project where your targeted profit is so slim that if your construction costs go up, if you're just wrong about something, if your lease up is slow, that you're underwater. So like, look, I could be the best guy in the world, but unless I'm going to finance 50 million with 100% equity, this project's not happening because the banks are smart and they're not going to lend to a developer, no matter who he is, that has such a slim margin of error if they're wrong. But so our county needs to change some things up and make it. And I have some ideas for it, but if the problem's going to be addressed at scale, for-profit guys have to get involved. Because there's not going to be enough money swimming around for the nonprofit guys to take care of it all.
Kevin has his hand up. I also want to note we have 30 minutes left in the meeting, and I know we want to save some time for public comment and homework. So, Kevin?
This is most likely a parking lot issue, but I think the overall task force needs to wrestle with this very issue that Preston brought up about those who make decisions at the government level on through John Q. Public do not understand how these projects are financed. So they assume that developers and builders are just making loads and loads of money. They don't recognize all that he just shared. So there needs to be some sort of educational piece about the importance of workforce housing and affordable housing to how we all live and those who live in it. Because the other big issue around all of this is the NIMBYism. You know, if you're going to try to make change at the regulatory level, that's going to be the huge pushback. So I think there needs to be a concerted campaign to really stress why we're all interconnected in these issues.
Yeah, I agree. I had a quick question for Marva, if you don't mind. I think, Preston, you mentioned this as well, that for your project, Marva, I don't think you used any federal funding, if I'm correct. Can you give us any kind of feedback about your experience of what funding sources you approached and which ones you didn't and maybe why?
Yeah, so I had to jump to my car because they shut down the internet for our whole building. But anyhow, so yeah, the project that my dad and I did was just a concept of wanting to do something that really made a change for for in whatever way we could to attack the affordable housing issues. So all of the funding came from my dad, roughly $3 million. And so we thought about going after different funding sources, but again, we're not developers. We were very new at it. Fortunately, I took the Jumpstart Wilmington course, which gave me a lot of information, but a lot of the barriers were having the time to be able to sit down and ask for the funding and put together a proposal. Also being a new developer, not having like financial documents to kind of show anything to even get off the ground and be eligible for that funding. And I think, some of the things that we ran into where there were a lot of,
Oh, think we lost Marva.
I think her point's well taken that she basically was able to run her own project because she had her own plan. Yeah.
And not using funding just to allow us the ability to create the project with as few barriers as possible.
Yeah.
I think, and getting back to the dedicated funding sources, I think there's a real opportunity here to go after some gaming revenue, to create a funding source for affordable housing, as well as the state begins to legalize its marijuana use. I mean, start taxing some, and start reinvesting that back into the communities.
And the top 1% of that transfer tax. We used to live very comfortably with a 3% transfer tax, which was already the highest in the nation here. And then we took the one tax in our state that was the highest in the nation and decided to make it higher by making it more, because we recognize that our state's very good at trying not to tax the people that will vote for you in the next election, but voting for the new people. And they consider a transfer tax like, well, that retiree is moving in, paying that fee, and it'll probably get lost in the mix of big numbers. But the state, and Pete Schwarzkopf will swear on his life that this isn't true, but it was. When it went from 3% to 4%, he said, look, as soon as we're back on our feet financially, we'll take that 1% right off. And it never came back. But a better way of saying, fine, keep your 4%, but that one extra percent or 25% of the total now is strictly going to be set aside for affordable housing.
But how much money is that? How long it's going to take?
It's in the tens of millions. Yeah.
It's a lot.
Okay.
But one thing too, I would also say is we shouldn't forget about the fact that, and even Sean should comment here, is that we've got a whole laundry list of current affordable housing stock. And while we can do all this for the new, unless we approach the backfill, that's all going to get wiped out unless we have the strategy for going forward for new and addressing the backfill, because I know of very much units that are coming offline that are going to come offline because of the values of the properties that have grown over time. So unless you're addressing the back with the new, we're also going to have a problem. We're just going to keep chasing the number to backfill what we
I'm kind of always amazed on. I don't really understand the world that much, but I'm amazed at how often those units get saved and they're still in the affordable house. Like even after it expires, they're like back in the pool of affordability and don't go market rate.
Depending on where they are, depends upon, well, I mean, they get
money.
He also has a lot of equity. There's also because a lot of the DSH debt. It's sort of there's some components to it being financed with debt, global debt that they have to get paid versus not. And then you can say, okay, well, if I go market rent, I can get another developer fee if I just redo it with credits. Or
well, I'm happy it gets saved, right? Kept it, but it's always comforting, at least from my outsider's perspective, that a lot of it finds a way of staying in the program.
It does, yeah. But there's units that do come up.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
So to your point though, I think I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
You got to do something to protect the units, right? Right now, nationally, there's a big movement for public housing units to go to RAD, right? And that's fine because it gives an injection of financing into units to get them up to speed. But what happens is it takes away the protection that they naturally have as a public housing unit. So in 30 years from now, it loses that protection. We need to put them into a land trust to make sure that they viably stay affordable beyond that period of affordability, because otherwise 30 years from now, all those RAD deals, they're going to become prime real estate because that's what's happened to housing authorities. Yeah. At one point, they were in the outskirts of our cities and they were undesirable, but then we grew around them and now they're primo real estate. So you could just predict 30 years from now what the worth of that property is going to be, and they're going to go market rate. So we've got to develop strategies to maintain them affordable beyond 30 years. We got to think ahead.
Yeah. Or they get refinanced and use the existing programs that the new construction can't have.
Okay, sorry guys.
Our friends online need us to project just a little bit more.
Okay, thank you.
And I do see Kevin's hand up, but I know you also wanted to perhaps move on to another item.
Yeah, we're gonna have to go to public comment very soon. So
Okay.
can we, Kevin, your comment, and then we'll switch to public comment.
Yeah, just so we've been talking a lot about government sources of money. The state a number of years ago put together this Neighborhood Assistance Act, where individuals who make qualified donations to nonprofits get a tax credit. I think there might be a way to look at how you could expand that specifically for affordable housing. Gifts towards affordable housing developers. I mean, we've got a person in the United States right now paying for votes. Why not incentivize people to help get involved with their wealth to build affordable housing?
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Wes?
Yeah, real quick before public comment, I just, from an administrative perspective, how are we keeping track of everything? And is there a way after this meeting to keep a list compiled that we can all see? What's the plan for that? Just so I know for this limited amount of time we have.
Sure. So my colleague is taking meeting minutes right now. Those will reflect all of the items that we're talking about. Also, Mr. Walls, thank you. He has been charting on the flip chart everything that we've been talking about. So between the flip chart and Stephanie's notes, all of those items will make their way into the meeting minutes for this meeting. And all of these meetings are recorded. So the recording will be available probably later today, if not tomorrow. We're also going to be sharing out the slide deck, so that will be available on our website as well.
I guess I meant more like tracking the individual items in case we want to follow up, not just the minutes. Is there, can we have some sort of Excel sheet where we can have each issue listed, then we can add comments or something? I don't know if that's possible.
Yes, I could do that. I mean, my point was like the minutes will capture all of these items. So that'll be one place we can go back to refer to it, but I can also look into creating a shared Excel sheet. I think I can accommodate that.
That would be useful. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah.
Did you want to talk about homework before public comment or?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so because we have so few, we had a few things that came up today. I know both Matt and Preston specifically were talking about the math problems that are associated with this. You know, how much can we figure out from a subsidy amount? Like, what do we need? You know, using what we know. So there is an article about the missing middle that I think really applies. We can send out to everyone. Caitlin found it, and it's really great to think about how we look at housing for the workforce specifically, that we think if we start putting little formulas together about it, to try to identify, you know, how much subsidy we ultimately need either for home ownership, thinking to Matt's point about, you know, both the properties that need to be redeveloped as far as units that need to be saved, and then new units construction, like how much HDF, for example, we might need, how much lending money, how much subsidy, that sort of thing. So just encourage the group to think about any of those math problems that we think we can kind of come up with, to really start thinking about performance so that we can put real numbers around some of the asks we might be making within the final report, and we can kind of try to identify. And I know it's going to be different geographically. We'll just have to kind of, you know, put a little star next to that. Even thinking about infill, you know, Kevin, Marva, others, Karen, you know, you're doing a lot of work in Dover as well. So, you know, the idea of, you know, what an infill development looks like, of a single family or a duplex or something to that effect. And, you know, really, I think it would be helpful for us to some extent, demonstrate why we can't just grab a house that's already there, just fix it up for like 60 grand and sell it as a flip for affordable. That doesn't necessarily work, and what some of the barriers are. The other thing that I think would be really helpful, and just thinking of how we can share back at the next meeting as we're starting to think about kind of what's next and what we might want to recommend. What can we learn from other jurisdictions, policies, funding mechanisms, preservation of subsidy, that sort of thing. So, you know, what's out there. One of the great things in the missing middle article was that some jurisdictions, some states are looking at their development code and saying that if you do a 10-unit building and it's affordable housing, you can use the residential code versus the commercial code. And so they're really thinking about how many units needs to be in that particular property before you switch which code you have to do. So whether you have to then start doing different egress situations or sprinklers and that sort of thing. So that's kind of our homework. It's fairly broad, but I encourage you to kind of pick an item that you might be interested in exploring a little bit more deeply so that we can show that to group.
Yeah, and so I'll share the missing middle article with all of the members. It was produced by the Turner Center, and basically they asked different developers to do a pro forma to see if different missing middle housing types would pencil out in specific markets in California. And the article lays out all of the assumptions that went into the pro formas. And one thing that I thought was interesting is, you know, they're assuming that it's going to take the standard amount of time to go through, you know, the review process. I'm wondering if, can we have two scenarios? Can we have scenario one, where we're assuming that it's going to take however long it normally does? And can we look at, say we cut that time in half? How would that change the math? Would it change the math?
Totally does.
And so I think that would help us to get to, you know, helping come up with recommendations for our regulatory and permitting subcommittee, because they'll be digging much deeper into, you know, what that process looks like, how long it takes, how to streamline it. So I'll send that out at the end of the day for our members.
Can I add a potential other one that I think just makes sense to at least look at? Public housing authorities, as I mentioned, they're going to RAD, they still have fair plot. So those units don't go away, even though they might reduce the amount that they have. So your housing authorities might have the capacity to build or allocate new housing. Are we maximizing those? Or do we just have some housing authorities that are just sitting on those fair plot units?
What are you calling them?
Yeah, so every housing authority, when it was initially set up, had X amount of units. Over time, they knock them down, or they, you know, they go into RAD or whatever. But those units still exist for them, so that you can maximize that to say, okay, are we maximizing what the full potential of the housing authority? So my challenge is, you know, should we do a quick review of the housing authorities to find out who has any fair plot and what is that amount, and then why don't we start there? Because that's naturally can be put back online.
That HUD doesn't support public housing enough. It's not.
So they're not going to go beyond the limit, but if they're there, they exist. So,
Yeah.
so that's what I'm saying. At least let's take advantage of the ones that we have access to.
So
I'm just wondering if we can have specific homework assignments, because, you know, it could have, to me, it's like, we need all this information, and I mean, I just don't think we're gonna get to it if you just sort of lay it out there loosely. Be frank. Maybe later we say we'll do this or something. And I would really love to see these meetings be more like 2 hours, or we have a longer session where we really brainstorm in depth. I mean, an hour and a half just, to me, doesn't do it. And if we gave maybe the next meeting, you know, I'll throw it out there, like a day, you know, then maybe we get somewhere, you know, or a couple of hours. But I'd rather do that than hour and a half every month.
Yeah, it's spending the whole day anyway.
Yeah.
I can offer, if people want, relative to the homework, to do kind of a, I don't know, seminar tutorial, but I'll pull up some of my pro formas and then show you what happens when you drop in different programs. Because my pro formas immediately update, so you can immediately see what's happening to the returns. So we'll drop in the SCRP program into one of my apartment programs, and I'll show you when you have a 22% IRR, but after this program it's 7.7%. That's a dead project. It'll never happen.
Plug in a 24,000 unit pro forma if you had a magical piece of land, and just show that, and show how much subsidy you would need just to have a 24,000 unit thing, and then start putting different scenarios around land. Because then you break up the 24,000 into different land uses, and
Well,
that's
we
how you go.
We have Dutchman's Harvest, which is for sale one, so I can say here's our total cost per unit for the for sale units. And that one has Milford Housing coming in, buying some of the units at direct cost. That's a whole other topic, by the way, of why for sale affordable housing is particularly difficult, because what you want to do is the entity that's selling the housing wants to keep it affordable. So they don't want home buyer A flipping it to home buyer B to make 25 or 30% immediately. So it's in a land trust or whatever. But what we're finding is home buyer A says, well, hold on a sec. The whole reason I want to get out of being a renter and being an owner is because I want to build equity and that's gonna be like the primary source of my wealth 20 to 30 years from now, and you're stealing that from me. And you have to say, well, hold on, I'm not stealing it, but you're gonna buy a house for $250,000 in the city of Lewis next to an $800,000 house that's very similar. You can't then turn around and sell it for $800,000. So there's like a middle ground there, but we're finding it extremely odd that we're having a hard time finding buyers interested in buying units that are 1/2 market rate because they're not going to be able to participate in the equity the way they would if they found a beat up home in Laurel and fixed it up, and then they could participate in equity.
I guess that's also an education. Say you'd probably be better off buying the limited equity in Lewis than you would be taking 100% of equity involved.
Yeah,
that becomes an education problem. Should be for
well, on the Milford housing one, because it's in the land trust, I think it is forever. On ours, we have what we were calling market rate, but our market rates were still $150,000 to $200,000 below market, and so now there's a 10-year burnout. 10. And it's kind of proportional. So the day you buy it, you can mark it up 10% and resell it just to pay your closing costs and your kind of transition costs. But then you earn out up to, so 10 years from now, you could sell it for 700,000 or whatever it is. Yeah.
I thought it was a 20-year deed restriction before the projects and use.
Well, I'm not using any, this is just our, there's no federal, state, any subsidies in this, with the exception of the fact that Lewis cut our building permit fee from 1.5% to 1%. So there's a couple people kind of added some stuff in there.
All right, so I will chat with our chair after the meeting about future meeting and whether we can extend that. At this time, we will do public comment. So each person who wants to provide public comment will be given 2 minutes to speak. I have a timer, which everybody should be able to see. I will start with folks who are here in the room with us. Are there any people? Mr. Walls?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. If you want to get a little bit closer, just so everybody can hear you. You can stand as long as you project. All right. Are you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
My name is Joe Walls. I'm the CEO of Veterans Services. We look to provide housing for elderly and disabled veterans. A lot of what you brought up into this room is what I'm running into. For instance, yesterday I got an email from the Delaware State Housing Authority denying our application for MIF funding, the Mixed Income Multi-Family Fund. In one instance, we asked for funding to repurpose a motel from 10 motel rooms to 10 townhouse. We're going to add a bedroom and make it 10 townhouses, and then turn around and sell them to housing choice voucher people under the home ownership program that is available to them. The Delaware State Housing Authority denied that because on the one hand, we were only asking for 10 units, and they said the minimum that you had to ask for was 35 units, which is a big number. On the other hand, they denied it because we said that 100% of the units would be affordable housing units. And they said, no, the program, a maximum of 20% of the units can be affordable housing. That makes no sense to me at all. The whole idea is to create as many affordable housing units as you can. And if 100% would be the goal, 20% should be the minimum that you should make available. You should shoot for 100% affordable housing. It makes no sense to me, especially the time and effort that we had to put into to develop these pro formas, like he was saying, which blew my mind trying to do that stuff. But you know, it just doesn't make any sense. It goes back to the lack of expertise, I think, and the interpretation of these federal regulations that go along with this money. Thank you.
Thank you.
I gave copies of my thing.
Yeah. Is there anybody else in the room? Okay, I see 2 hands, Mr. Malone. And then Scott, you can go next. Did you raise your hand, Sean? Okay. All right, I'll start it.
Thank you. I'm Judd Malone with the Springboard Collaborative, new name, Springboard Delaware. Our name is too similar to another nonprofit in Pennsylvania, so we have a DBA now. Our focus has been on providing an interim housing solution for people who are homeless. But it's interim, and they have the support, the wraparound services they need in order to move on to permanent housing. But there's not any permanent housing to move on to. So, and looking at the definition that I agree with, affordable housing is what you can afford to rent or own, 30% typically of your income. If you look at the statistic of the gap, 50% of AMI and below, it said 19,000 some odd. Well, if my memory's right, 30% or below is 14,000 of that 19,000. It is by far the largest gap in available housing for people at extremely low income. So we're in the process of trying to develop a permanent housing solution using manufactured cottages with favorable zoning, access to land, and oddly enough, an ability to produce that housing in months because you just roll units into once you develop the site. The construction is the quickest thing. The financial stack is daunting. And one last thing to talk about that, when you talk about your rental income, just because you can get subsidies, two things. It's a subsidy compared to fair market rent, not actual market rent. So fair market rent from HUD is substantially lower than what the actual market. So that means that the gap you're going to get, the most you're going to get is a reduced rental rate. On top of it, someone else mentioned the compliance. If you accept vouchers, you get compliance, and that's a cost. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Mr. Kidner.
Sure. Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Scott Kidner. I represent various real estate interests. 2 words, rent control. I ask this subcommittee to be aware that our friends in the assembly, specifically the sponsor, will be returning this year with rent control. If you want to put a nail in the coffin of just about anybody who wants to operate in this space, whether it be affordable or market, you say, and we're going to bring rent control. So I have been sounding the clarion call, and I ask you all to just be aware that this issue is alive, is being advocated, and it will return in January. So I'm gonna have some fun. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to start introducing myself because 2 minutes is barely going to get me through all these comments. I thought it was great. Thank you, Madam Chair, for having me. My name is Sean Kelly. I'm Executive Vice President for Leon Wiener and Associates.
I'm sorry, could you project just a little
yes,
more?
My name is Sean Kelly, Executive Vice President for LNWA. We are an affordable housing developer based in Wilmington. I sit on the Regulatory and Land Use Subcommittee, so I think that this was really helpful because I'm going to be able to take some of the information I heard today here and hopefully we can cross-collaborate. I think that would be great. But my background is primarily in affordable housing finance, so in no particular order, I'm going to go through some of the notes I scribbled down, kind of reacting to some of the comments here. I am very concerned about the ARPA programs going away. Deanna Sargent mentioned the Catalyst program, but that's also going to extend to the Accelerator and Mixed Income program, further kind of amplifying the need for more HDF resources. Preston and Matt both talked a lot about that. As far as HDF is concerned, love to see some additional creativity with regards to the HDF program, perhaps creating a middle income product like a 10-year interest-only mortgage that could serve missing middle residents, thinking creatively about that product. I also think that this group might be well served by looking to the Montgomery County, Maryland model, the Housing Commission of Montgomery County. Their group is very creative. Essentially, they're fostering affordable and middle income housing by mimicking what's like a P3 student housing model where there's a governmental ownership piece in the underlying land of the property that allows the agency to issue 100% municipal bond debt And then the debt financing is very low, and you can translate that into low rents for the property. You also benefit from a tax abatement when you move with that structure, allowing you to further target affordability. I'm not even close to 2 minutes here, so.
We do accept written comments as well.
Okay, all right, and I just want to let everyone know that I'm going to present in regulatory and land use, some concepts of how we can upzone our existing affordable housing. We have more than 1,500 affordable housing units in the state of Delaware at our company. And in many instances, Georgetown, Del Mar, Seaford is a great example. We could be doing a lot more with the land that we already own. So increased density on existing affordable housing, I think, presents a great opportunity here in the state. We've already, working with our great colleagues at DSHA, know where our existing affordable housing is. And I think that we can that might combat some of the typical NIMBY issues because the housing is already existing there. We need to make it more dense so that people can have development opportunities in transit-oriented areas and things of that nature. So I'm out of time.
Thank you. Okay, is there anybody else in the room who wishes to give public comment? Okay.
I'll just piggyback on making the HDF much more flexible and creative.
Thank you. Okay. At this time, if anybody online would like to give public comment, please use the raise hand button to raise your hand. And then I'm going to ask Brandon to unmute folks since I'm screen sharing. Brandon, do we have any hands raised? Let's see here.
Caitlin, you do have a bunch of hands raised. I don't.
Okay, yeah. For some reason, I'm not hearing Brandon's audio. I'm not going to be able to screen share and do Zoom at the same time. So we're going to rely on my,
Sorry, Bellstock School's got his hand raised, Richard.
Okay, yeah, no, I need to set the timer on my phone. So bear with me 1 minute. Hybrid meetings are always fun, right? Okay, I am going to go in the order in which I see hands raised. So, although I think I will defer first to Senator Huxtable since he is one of our co-chairs. So, Senator, if you will.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. Well, thank you all for the work that you are doing. I really do appreciate it. I heard most all the conversation and like the ideas and the collaboration amongst the table. I know we were talking about financing sources and things of that nature, but we also need to worry about the long-term operations. And I'd just like to throw out there when we look at other models, I think New Jersey might have a pilot program, payment in lieu of taxes, for their affordable housing complexes where the local jurisdiction gets some tax revenue, but there's some clarity and what that how that is formed and how much they pay, and provides a little bit more stability for the operations of those units. So just keep that in mind, and thank you all for the work that you're doing on behalf of Delaware.
Thank you, Senator. Okay, the next hand I see is Cheyenne Miller. So Cheyenne, you should be able to unmute at this point.
Hi, my name is Cheyenne. I've also am just thinking about some of the things that I've heard in my work around housing reform. And one of the concerns I have is also kind of what Joe Walls brought up with the concerns that some funding sources are requiring like mixed income and saying that only a certain portion of the housing is allowed to be low income. And that I think is a real harm to building more affordable housing. It doesn't really make sense. And I think it's really rooted in this idea about essentially like people living in poverty being concentrated in one area. I think there's a lot of racial undertones with that. I really hope that this group will explore what it means for financing to basically say you're not allowed to give money unless that there's a certain lower, like there's a lower amount of low income people there. I think that really can hurt people long-term. And it doesn't make sense for a lot of our tax dollars to be going towards supplementing more development if we do not see that that's going to result in more affordable housing. So I'm hoping that we can think about that as a finance subcommittee, that like we just, I really think we need to rethink this idea about like what does it mean to be living in concentrated poverty? And is concentrated poverty really an issue, or are we talking about a lot of underlying factors of racism and classism that make it so that these places are actually made impoverished? If people can afford their rent, they wouldn't be impoverished, right? It doesn't make much sense.
Thank you. The next hand I see is Jim Purcell. Jim, you should be able to unmute at this point.
Thank you, everybody. Jim Purcell, I'm with Milford Housing Development. As you all know, we're very much a large stakeholder in the multifamily and in the single family development in Delaware. But one of the things I wanted to touch base on here is financing and support for rehab. We have a lot of substandard housing in our state. We are the emergency we do the emergency repair service for the state of Delaware. There's a lot more needs out there in terms of being able to assist property owners and rental properties with the establishment of financing and grants to help make the house efficient and healthy and safe. The other thing that I'll also add is that we will be expanding our home repair program to be more inclusive of energy efficiency and healthy through some grant funding. And hopefully it'll be a public and private, partnership as we move forward into this arena. The last two things I wanted to bring up is just being open to accessory dwelling units. We just completed our first accessory dwelling unit, and we look to be doing this in many other parts of the state as zoning permits. And then also to tiny home development as well. That's something that we're exploring a lot, and hope that to develop some of those types of properties. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the next hand I see is Laura Gendro. Laura, you should be able to unmute.
Hi, Caitlin. And hi, to all on the subcommittee. I just wanted, everyone pretty much tapped on to, the areas of concern. I just wanted to note that, Colorado does institute a 1%, that is able to go into a specific trust for housing. There's an interesting document that NYU did on a policy brief on the emerging spectrum of government-led and publicly owned housing development that I sent over to Caitlin, and I would encourage her to share. A couple of areas, that we're seeing concern. Dion mentioned gap funding. It continues to be an issue, especially with our low to very low moderate income families who are looking at home ownership. Public housing, the Wilmington housing, the housing development, the Section 8 program do have an array of homes that they've been sitting on and haven't necessarily been able to sell. How we can assist them to do that, how we can help to get families from renting to home ownership is something that I know we are all interested in. Kevin had mentioned both zoning regulations, because we know that zoning, especially the zoning NIMBYism that exists, especially in the southern part of our state, is of concern. But I also wanted to bring up, I recently became aware of the $52 billion that the Biden-Harris administration has given towards semiconductors. There are two, Fujifilm and DuPont, that have received between $47 million and $50 million to build locations that will be manufacturing semiconductors in our state, one in Glasgow and two in Newcastle. We need to look towards these large businesses and leverage the dollars that they're receiving to build these manufacturing hubs, because we're looking at an infusion of approximately 43,000 jobs, which is just going to increase the need for housing. And the disparities are just going to continue to grow, especially with new manufacturers coming into our state. So those are just some thoughts.
Thank you, Laura. And just to clarify, did you send that email to me today or?
Yes.
Okay, great. I will check for it and share with the committee.
I will also send you the proposal of the 206 million that's been allocated to Delaware through the U.S. Commerce.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so next up we have Lisa Rice. Lisa, you should be able to unmute. And Lisa, if you're talking, we can't hear you. But it does appear that you're unmuted.
Okay. How about now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Okay. I wanted to let you know I sent you 2 documents during the meeting with some information that I think that you will find helpful. I'm gonna try to share as much as I can. I shared funding for CDFIs. I shared information about utilizing investors for affordable housing and feeling okay about it with long-term leases, with faith-based organizations managing the property, using faith-based organizations for the property that they have. Investors have been very picky about projects that they're going to choose. So I wanted to remind everybody that affordable housing also does include the disabled. It's only been since 2021 that disabled adults are not allowed to be institutionalized anymore. So there's an incredible need for housing. And the best part about this is that the federal government is offering a lot regarding paying for services and for building and construction. And what I love about the USDA is that a for-profit business can qualify for funding if they have a nonprofit sponsor. So that's great. USDA multifamily acquisition, and I'm gonna save the rest. I think that it's addressed in the email, and if not, I will continue to fill in the blanks.
Great, thank you, Lisa. I will definitely share your emails with the committee. And then next we have, Khadijah Robinson. You should be able to unmute.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your time. I think that this committee, the subcommittee, and that's the emphasis on housing in Delaware is excellent. I work with individuals who are of low income and marginalized. However, in listening to the finance committee, this subcommittee, it's important that we reiterate that it's not just about the money. It's about the legislative piece. It's about the committee piece. It's about all of us coming together and work together, because the housing is definitely an issue, but the income and the wages and the education and all the other systemic issues that come through from things that have been legislated throughout this state down through the years are also an issue. And it's going to take addressing everything and all of us continuing to come together, to work together, to really tackle this situation head on. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands raised. If somebody does wish to give public comment, now would be the time to raise your hand. Okay, and seeing none, we will close public comment for the meeting. We will accept written comments within the next 48 hours. Those can be emailed to housing.taskforce@delaware.gov. So any written comments received in that inbox in the next 48 hours will be appended to the meeting minutes for today's meeting. And I will now turn it back over to our chair to adjourn.
All right, well, thank you everyone for staying a little bit later. I want to thank members of the public for attending and for speaking. We really value your opinion. Like I said, we nine certainly don't know everything. And so having that additional context, I think is really important. So thank you everyone. We do have our next meeting scheduled. I don't have the date in front of me. I think everyone has it and it's available online. But I look forward to seeing everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.